Hello and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar titled ESG Reporting, Demystified, Leveraging Tools and Expertise for Corporate Sustainability Success. So it's 3:02, so I think we can proceed to start. We've already got a good crowd here today. So I'm thrilled to have all of you here today as we delve into the world of ESG reporting through hopefully an engaging panel discussion. So before I begin, I would like to introduce myself, as well as our panel speakers who will be discussing with you some of the key topics on ESG reporting. So my name is Farah Jamaluddin. I am a sustainability ESG practitioner here at Softec 360. Next, we have Mr. Irfan. Mr. Hafizullah Irfan is the founder and CEO of Softec 360. And Mr. Irfan has been in the consultancy and service industry for many years and is well versed with the understanding of how companies need support, especially now in order to implement ESG into their organizations. And then we have Dr. Bima Roy Bamu. He is the co-founder and CEO of ESG Disclosed, based from London, UK. Dr. Bima is an expert in knowing the ins and outs of ESG frameworks and standards and providing solutions for organizations to begin their ESG journey. So as we know today, even in the latest news, the ESG, ESG agenda has become very pivotal to organizations in order to thrive and evolve in the market. Latest news are full of new ESG updates, and soon it will start to become a regulation, especially when dealing with overseas market. So on top of that, rather than just thinking of ESG as a compliance for your market, as well as to the regulations, we need to also know and other than the impact on environment and emission, we need to also ensure that the social and governance aspect of ESG is looked into. So the ESG initiative should include all three, E, S, and G, as it affects brand, consumer trust, and stakeholders' expectations. So let's look into the topic. These are the key questions that I would like to highlight. So in this topic itself, I will cover two key questions, which is how can organizations benefit from ESG expertise in terms of strategy and aligning with their sustainability goals. So first and foremost, before anything, we need to know where you are now. So a readiness assessment is vital to do in order for you to evaluate your preparedness to address and integrate ESG factors into your business operations, strategy, and decision-making process. So these are the sort of like the key points that you need to look into in order to know where you are right now. Now, once you've already assessed where you are, you need to know where you are going. So with that, once you've done an assessment, you will be able to know where are your gaps at your current state and where the organization wants to be in terms of ESG goals and standards. And then you need to take remedial actions to ensure you are compliant to ESG standard and framework, and also towards your ESG goals. So there are already available tools in the market now, especially from us, with the Bursa My ESG disclosure, where we are doing the ESG gap analysis and readiness assessment for our clients in order to help them in their ESG implementation. Other than that, how would you build on expertise, especially to ensure your internal expertise have the knowledge and capacity to implement the ESG? So trainings are also available, and many trainings right now are already, very focused and niche in terms of topics in regards to ESG. For example, it could be very niche down to financial management, it could be niche down to labor practices or supply chain, and a lot of the trainings are customizable according to your needs and also your industries. This is an example of an upcoming awareness session where some of the trainings are already HRD Corp claimable. So then you can also utilize your levy in order for you to send your internal team for training. So second, the key question that we cover here is what features should organizations look for in ESG reporting to streamline their reporting efforts effectively. So I will cover two reporting tools, which is the ESG reporting as well as GHG reporting. So what we find that you need to be aware of when you're looking into ESG solutions software is that it's tailored solutions for your ESG journey, regardless of your company size and ESG experience. The software needs to come with major ESG frameworks, and for Malaysia, it should also include Bursa. And of course, if your company is different industry, different products or different processes, it will be personalized accordingly to your company. For GHG, you should look into that the emissions can be measured in order for you to reduce and offset it one day. You should also be looking into automating your data collection and carbon analytics and GHG compliant emissions report produced by the software. So these are the two questions that I've covered. And from these two basic questions, the key takeaways are number one, ESG expertise can provide valuable guidance, especially during the earlier stage when you're not sure yet how to start, where you are, and how to get there. Second, it's important for you to build your internal capability in order for you to ensure that the continuous journey of your ESG implementation. And number three is modernize your ESG reporting process using tools available that can help you to ensure your ESG report is accurate and transparent. So most of this webinar will be conducted via a panel session. So that was just a short introduction to some of the key questions in regards to this topic. So I welcome now Mr. Irfan and Dr. Bimal, our subject matter experts for today, to join in this session. I open the floor for our audience to engage with our panelists. You can ask questions that can maybe things that you feel that you need to help on to empower you to excel in ESG reporting and your corporate sustainability. So if you have questions, you can write it in your chat box, or you can actually turn on the mic and ask it directly. Okay, Mr. Irfan, you're still on mute, so I just want to make sure if you're saying anything, just make sure you unmute yourself, yeah? All right, so let me see. While we wait for questions to come in, I would like to start off the panel session with a question that is relevant to the topic. So let me start off with Dr. Bimal. Okay, Dr. Bimal, what are usually the main challenges that you see organizations usually face when developing an ESG transition plan, especially in getting the organization and its supply chains to adopt to ESG practices?
Hi, thank you, Farhan. Look, hello to everybody. Thank you for joining this. In terms, I think from kind of, experience going back sort of 20, 25 years, but kind of looking at Malaysia over the last few years, look, the key challenge around ESG is in the pace at which ESG has become an urgent agenda for companies. I mean, the landscape has changed over the last year or so, and it's been driven by formal regulatory requirements, whether that's from central banks like Bank Negara or people like Bursa Malaysia, or mainly from investor side and also the customers. All of this has meant that, for years, companies were able to just essentially produce whatever report they want in terms of ESG. And in very glossy reports, and it was kind of open to claims of greenwashing. The real key challenges for companies really fall into a couple of areas, really. And I'm not going to start with technology, because technology is an enabler. The tool or the software solutions are enablers. But prior to that, I think the key challenge is understanding the regulatory landscape. And what I would say is awareness and education. This is really crucial for a company to have this in place in both for their employees and their supply chains in order to understand where they are currently in their ESG journey, have the skills developed working with third parties, but over a long term, have ESG kind of training within the company, which allows them to put together ESG transition plans and to drive that change both internally and externally. I think so far the ESG kind of gained one of the other consequences is that ESG has been very much an internal focusing issue for companies, but I think the real big challenge for companies is that they now have to account for their supply chains, which means they have to reach out to suppliers. So there's a number of different areas that you have to look at, and the challenges aren't just about finding a solution to reporting. Reporting is one aspect of ESG, but to implement ESG, you need to have the skills and education within the organization and within your supply chain, but also understand what your stakeholders are wanting. So there are a number of different things that come into play, not just in terms of understanding the regulations or going out and getting an ESG tool.
Okay, so you are saying first get the either internal team with the skills and the education needed.
Well, I think yeah, there is that element, but I've seen in Malaysia, working with clients in Malaysia, that there's been a real rush to try and create ESG transition plans, real rush to try and demonstrate that people are doing, not without really understanding where they are currently or having the internal capability and deep level knowledge to be able to pull this through. Before it's like anything else in life, before you pull together a plan, understand where you are. And two things really drive that ability to deliver ESG for whomever, whether it's for investors, for your customers, whether it's for statutory reporting, which is training and education, and a real understanding of what regulations you have to abide by, especially if we work across multiple territories. So really understanding where you are currently, and do you have the knowledge to be able to develop those plans.
All right. So what I took from that is that one, skills internally.
Yeah.
Build your internal capability. And with that knowledge, you will also know the regulations that you need to comply to. And then only it will come down to the ESG reporting tools once you get all this in place.
Yeah.
All right.
And actually, it's not the same for any two companies. It really depends on where you are in your ESG adoption and maturity. So that's the other thing you need, a company needs to understand.
Okay, Mr. Irfan, would you like to add on to Dr. Bimal's feedback?
Yeah, I agree toward what Bimal was saying. That basically it's about the understanding of the requirement and what you want to do with it. I think I want to highlight two things here. One is like what Dr. Bimal mentioned. There are a lot of compliances or statutory requirements that are coming, and a lot of people feel confused that there are so many 3 or 4 abbreviation words that keep on coming across. So for me, it's not a confusion as such, because if you know these compliances, they relate to 1 or 2 needs. So if you are working in Europe, your compliance will be different. If you're working typically in Malaysia, the compliance will be different. So it depends on your need basis. So it's not about you have to comply with all the 70 plus standards that are there in the world now and which keep on evolving, but you have to look into what is your dynamics, where you are working as an organization. That is the first part where I think this readiness assessment and gap analysis can help, because we can together help companies to understand what is their reporting needs exactly are, from which standard they have to comply with. That is the first thing. And the second thing, I think, based on our interaction with local customers in Malaysia, the next part or the challenge part is the availability of data. Because in all these compliances, you have to report on substantiality of data. So that is the second thing where preparedness or readiness will come in. Do you have the data? You have the data in which format? And based on ESG disclose product capability, they have the APIs available. So how you bring data from different sources into reporting, that will be another part of the story. So I just want to add these two things.
Good. So with the knowledge, you would know which framework or standard to follow in order to comply. And second, availability of data is also the challenge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially in Malaysia,
yes.
if you are a Malaysian company, I think to what Dr. Bimal said is very true, that you have to start with Bursa Malaysia compliances first, because that is, you must be comply with that. That is not nice to have, that is must to have. So if you can start with there, the journey will begin, and gradually you can go to the other requirements as well.
All right. Okay, based on, I think we got a lot of key points there on the challenges that usually companies face. Okay, what about a typical time frame for a company to implement its ESG? Usually, how much should an organization estimate in terms of time, manpower involved, and because usually companies like these people are already doing something else, and now they need to add on something else. So let's say, for example, they are using existing internal resources. So how much time, how much manpower you estimate should be involved in implementing ESG? What do you think now, Mr. Irfan?
It depends again, like what Bimal mentioned earlier, it varies from company to company. So you have to go through that assessment first. It's not a complete end-to-end story from day one. So we have to go into small, I will say, projects, create milestones or small duration projects to get into internal create success first. So, and once we go through that, then there will be an ultimate journey which you have to cover up.
That's a good point. To start small and then internally build up all your ESG initiatives to become one big goal.
I think
yes,
just to add to what Irfan's saying, I mean, it's absolutely right. There's no two companies going to be the same. So the starting point is really understanding when you're working with a company where they are, right? So that's kind of given, where are they in terms of their ESG adoption? The second, this is a continuous process, right? So for example, if you take a Malaysia and you start there, so in the end of this year, you have a set of reporting requirements depending on your size of your company, and that's formal reporting. That's one of sort of several that will happen every year. So ESG as a journey will take 2, 3, 4. It's a continuous process. I think what you have to understand really is what is it that you need to focus on urgently, that is lacking in your company, in the way you manage your supply chain, and understanding that. So you have to, what I would say is within the first kind of 3 months is really understanding what the priority areas are, and then start focusing on those areas. So I don't think that anybody can just say it's going to take X amount of time. Until you have to work piece by piece. Absolutely.
All right. So that from your perspective, the getting to know where you are part will maybe take up to 3 months just to come up with a plan.
I think you can do a readiness assessment within a month, and then you work with and then say, okay, what are the key, you need to highlight what the real red flags are, if you like, in terms of ESG. What are the areas that you are lacking, or it's urgent for you to address and develop an ESG transition around that. There'll be a long-term ESG plan for a company based on where they are, what their kind of ethos, culture, what they want to say to the world. But that runs alongside. But I think it's about fixing what needs to be fixed very quickly, and then moving on from that.
All right, good. What about manpower? How many people should get involved when
I think the manpower is an interesting question. It's not about, you could have hundreds of people in a business. So we work with clients that have a very large ESG team, but that still have, their ability to deliver is largely determined by their understanding of where they are and the data points that they can collect from. Do they have the data and the real information upon which they can push forward and understand what they need to do. So it doesn't really matter. I think it's a combination of, having the manpower, but the manpower has to have, and this is a crucial point, must have deep ESG knowledge and understanding in terms of delivering operational projects, not just from a theoretical point of view, but actually having done. And this is a group, and Malaysia is not on its own. I think, when I kind of work with Bursa and speaking to them, they kind of figured there's about 200 real deeply kind of operationally enriched ESG SMEs in Malaysia. There are a lot of people that are rushing to become ESG badge thing, but that's just not. So it's not the number of people, it's the quality of the people you have in terms of their experience. And obviously, and amongst that is actually being clever and being smart by using really good technology to help you to speed up the data collection analysis and really kind of monitoring how you're getting on in terms of ESG.
Wow, there's some really powerful points there. So I took from there is that the manpower required, it depends on also the data points and information that you already have, as well as it's not about the number of people, but the quality of people there who understands the ESG plan. And of course, good technology to speed up and also the monitoring part of your ESG data. So I think we got some questions in the chat box. Let's see.
Right.
ESG regulations are constantly evolving. How can companies stay updated and compliant? So I think you mentioned earlier, Mr. Irfan, is that Bursa is something that we can follow with in Malaysia. But what about when, suddenly at the end of the year, something else is going to be a new standard? Like how does company, like today they decide they're going to use this, and then at the end of the year, suddenly things change. So how do you think they can stay updated and compliant? Like how would you think that they should decide on this?
So I will ask Bimal to.
Dr. Bimal? Yes.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question, and it can be really confusing and overwhelming. I think that in terms of keeping up, the first starting point is in terms of the frameworks is in which sector do you operate? What is the organization? What do you do as a company? And actually, you need to understand who are you trying to collect and report data on progress. So, if in Malaysia, I would absolutely start with the Bank Negara and Bursa guidelines, Bank Negara around climate management and risk, Bursa on a wide range of ESG, the first set of disclosures due. That is so. What's happening in the marketplace is what's happening in the marketplace is all the major frameworks. I think they will become consolidated over a period of time, but that's not going to happen immediately. So if you'll give you an example, Bursa Malaysia's framework that they're using in terms of their disclosures, it's really sort of taken from TCFD, which is where they ultimately want to be, with FTSE for Good, which is another set of measures, both financial and cutting across S&G. So I think you have to be practical and say what is it, but you need to understand so for example, if you work across multiple territories, or your supply chain goes across multiple territories, then you have to do the work and understand, okay, what do I need? What do they need to follow in order to be compliant? In other words, so one of the biggest challenges, for example, which is going to come from next year, is Scope 3. So Scope 3, what is Scope 3? Scope 3 is about all of those ESG factors that are not in your control. It's not just about indirect, it's actually in your supply chain, both upstream and downstream, in the sense of, what are they doing about ESG? Because it's data from them that you will need to pull in order to show that you as a company are compliant. So it becomes complex, and they might be in. So for example, you might have a company in the UK, but their main supply chain is in China. There'll be slightly different sets of regulations and apply. But the thing to do is to control that by actually giving them all the kind of key data points that you require. And that's, again, going back to working with SMEs to say, okay, this is what we need to do. But for Malaysia, I would absolutely advise the starting point be Bursa, even if you're not, FTSE listed. You may be a smaller company, SME, but I can guarantee you'll be part of that supply chain. So in order to sort of set yourself up in terms of future, that is a good starting point for Malaysia. Beyond that, I think you just have to look at the different frameworks used, whether that's because of what your investors are saying to you that they want to see, or whether the shareholders are saying, or whether it's a local kind of customers, whatever. So it is. I mean, for example, one of the things that we do in our kind of solutions is continuously update all of the frameworks and the major disclosure and data points are required. But that's because we have a set of SMEs that continually do that, and in the same way that's the same thing you have to do. So there is no one straight answer, but if you're in Malaysia and your predominant market is Malaysia, I would advise that you use that as a framework.
Okay, all right. So in Malaysia, try to use Bursa as the standard if possible, and also look into your supply chain. Like, are there other frameworks or regulations that you need to comply to in order for your supply, based on your supply chain, your scope 3.
Scope 3. Depending on, so for example, you could use. I think using a framework, whichever. Say, for example, you use GRI. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Because there are the disclosures. There are similar disclosures across all the frameworks. The big difference being some frameworks are very financially focused. Like TCFD, which is financially focused on climate risk. You've got SASB, which is materiality, in other words, the material impact of ESG, but from a financial perspective. And there's others that cover more S and G bits. So, I don't think you have to think to yourself from a company perspective, what are the kind of things that we want to demonstrate, whether to our investors, customers, or whatever, and you can pick and choose between the frameworks. But when it comes to formal reporting, you have to abide by whatever is in that country, right? So that's the simplest way of doing it.
Okay. Mr. Irfan, do you want to add on anything?
No, same thing I was about to say. It's okay.
Okay, sure. So let's see the next question from Kula. Our government implemented KPI reporting for GLCs. The problem was the integrity of data. How do you ensure ESG reporting doesn't suffer the same fate?
I think. Sorry, I've just seen the one of the questions: does ESG and CSR overlap? Yes, they absolutely do overlap. I think in terms of the quality of data, this is a critical issue. And I think in terms of collecting data, for instance, the approach that we do and many others do is from here on is use that we know what the disclosure questions are, we know what the data points, and we would work with you to actually see whether you have those data points at all. I think the quality of the data is something that will in itself is a project in itself. In other words, that's one of those. I think going back to what Farah, you were mentioning about. And in front, there'll be multiple projects around ESG, and one of them would be data cleansing and validating the integrity of their data. Ultimately, what's going to happen now, as opposed to with the example you said about the KPIs, they were very kind of voluntary. They were kind of very generic. I think what will happen is, as you get the formal disclosures gone in, and then vice versa would review it, and you would get what the plan is, they would give you a rating, an ESG rating, a company rating, depending on the submission. You have to take that feedback on over the next 12 months and say they will question some of the validity, because it's not just about putting numbers in. You will have to show evidence. Where did you get that evidence? And that's the only way of ensuring integrity. So in other words, it's not just about putting numbers in terms of your carbon emissions, or it's not, in terms of the carbon data, but actually whatever you put in across ESG, they are asking for evidence. Please show us the evidence that how you collected it, where you collected it, and what did you do internally. And that's one of the ways of creating much more credibility around the data. But it is a challenge. Absolutely is a challenge.
I think on top of that, I think for carbon calculation, they have assurance, like for the ISOs. But for the overall ESG reporting, it's not yet available, like an assurance report from a third party. Right.
I think absolutely for the EBIT, for instance, for our when we collect and analyze and the data, there is assurance because it's been going on for many more years. I think the S&G, I think that what we advise clients is to provide as much evidence as possible. When I talk about S&G, it might be your policies are around sort of slave labor conditions. What is your have you actually looked at your supply chain in terms of how they treat their workers, human rights, etc. It's providing the evidence of you actually having done that, and that's a way of actually creating some credibility around the data.
Okay, so I think the key points there was making sure evidence is tallies with the data. And if in some level you are able to get assurance from a third party, then that could also help towards the integrity of the data.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another question here. So you already answered ESG and CSR does overlap. By Haizen, we have not yet started. I'm guessing this is ESG journey. Which should my company focus on first, carbon calculation or ESG reporting? Mr. Irfan, you want to take on that one?
I think both of them are two different things. So carbon calculation is something which is part of the ESG reporting, but you have to focus ultimately on ESG reporting, like what we were discussing earlier. There is already some compliances out there. So we have to follow ESG reporting, and in the meantime, you have to come up with carbon calculation or carbon emission, which is part of the E of ESG. So I won't say you cannot pick either of them. Somehow we have to, unfortunately or fortunately, we have to work on both simultaneously. Bimal.
Yeah, I think I mean, from an E perspective, I think scope 1 and 2 you have to report on, and it's something that it's already kind of required. I think you've got there's a little bit more time given to companies to start reporting on scope 3, which is much more complex because it's all about your supply chain management and getting the data. But I think from a reporting, I would say scope 1 and 2 is absolutely essential. But you can't simply just ignore that the kind of the S&G bit either. And there are some basic reporting or basic, I would say before the reporting bit, I think what it is it's about implementing the principles of ESG within the organization. And part of that is educating staff and everybody else as to why it's important, why it matters, making them understand what it is. And then, that is the starting point of the journey. But I think, as Irfan said, there are certain things you have to report anyway, whether it's something you can't pick and choose.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Haizen. Okay, next we go to Mr. Sami. Sure, go ahead. Please ask your question.
Gentlemen, thanks for some of the insights into ESG. Of course, there are as you rightly mentioned, it's reporting is one thing. The integrity of the data is super critical, as we all probably know. And then the audit of the data is also important. The big disconnect that I see down the road is organizations rushing to fill in these forms or whatever without checking the integrity of the data. And then most importantly, the people or the staff are not trained to really understand the importance of ESG. It becomes a kind of like fill out this form and that's it, and we get the scoring, etc. And I think that is what we see, or I certainly see, when talking to a lot of our customers in the business across the board, is the lack of training. And I think that is super critical for success of any system or any process. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on in terms of your, what you, and this is something I can actually echo and seen so many, it's the reporting bit is just one aspect of the whole thing. Now, what will change as a result of this statutory reporting? In other words, you have to supply the evidence, and then there's somebody else, external party, looking at it from an audit perspective. Is that one of the things that will change the whole landscape from a corporate perspective is those ESG ratings will have a direct financial and business commercial impact on the companies. So what that means is their ability to raise finance, their investment worthiness will all be related to the ESG rating. So the first time there is a tangible link between what they are collecting and reporting and the impact on the company. In that sense, because what we're moving away from is, you're right, it's just arbitrary, I mean, some nonsense kind of data input, which is then wrapped around a really glossy, I personally know a lot of companies that specialize in producing ESG reports, but they're kind of essentially greenwashing. So I think, in terms of, there will be a downward pressure. In other words, I'll give you an example. Company A gets a ESG rating of 4 out of 5, which is very good, and another company in exactly the same sector might get 2 out of 5. Now that will start the board thinking, hey, why have we got 2 out of 5? Because that has a direct impact. But all of this does come down to one simple thing, which is education skills. Really, it really kind of embedding that ESG understanding into the organization. We are very, very far away from that. I work with companies and even senior sustainability teams and ESG teams, where when you get to know them, they're really struggling to understand sort of all elements of ESG from a basic sort of standpoint upwards. Yes, the EBIT it's been more established. So I think what you're doing, that is part of the challenge. But I think if you're honestly, and without sharing, my discussion certainly with the likes of Bursa is that they know that that's going to happen because they're themselves learning. Because I think if we're having this conversation in 12 months' time, or when the first cycle of reporting has gone in and the feedback come in, I think you'll see a real rapid change. It's basically the biggest challenge, and the most that I do spend time when I'm talking to clients, is making them understand why ESG is important, because there is still a huge swathe of people at all levels of organization who just think ESG is a bit of a fad, and still, something that comms and PR needs to sort out. Once you start saying, actually, this is the impact it'll have on your business from a financial perspective, and I know it's not all about finance, but financial and consumer response perspective, then they start to understand. But that level of understanding is not common at the moment, sadly.
Agree, but the social responsibility aspect is pretty important, and being a social audit is also equally important, and it's a continuous improvement process,
It is. I mean, and what's happening is, the ESG things, the immediate focus of the next 12 months is around financial audits, right, and actual hard data. But you're right. There will be a coming time where they will look at all aspects of that, including the social impact, the impact that a company or an individual has on the society around them. But I think it's a journey that's going to take, in my view, 2 or 3 years before you get to that point. But at least we're on the starting point now, that I think those of us been involved in this ESG, even before it's called ESG, going back to EHS, the last year has been an incredible change of focus and in terms of regulatory kind of pressures. So that's what I'm hoping that keeps expanding. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sami. Do you have anything else to add, Mr. Sami?
That's it. I mean, really, I mean, we're in its infancy at the moment, and we just have to see how it goes, because we don't want it to end up like, this carbon credits and all that went around. It was a money-making racket for some countries, as
absolutely,
and we don't want to get
100% agree. Yeah, 100% agree with you.
And I think it's to do with our education. This ESG needs to be implemented at the grassroots levels in schools and colleges, universities. So when people come out into the workforce, they fully understand the value of ESG and what it's for.
No, 100% agree. 100% agree.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sami. I think the next question, if I can throw it to Mr. Irfan, it's about IT systems. What are the challenges and opportunities of using ERP system to track and measure ESG performance?
So again, ERP is, I will say, is a good starting point, because a lot of data that we currently need for ESG reporting, whatever framework we are using, may be available in ERP. But that, like I said, it may be available because some of the data which is numbers but not in financial nature may not be in the ERP. So, but like we were discussing, when you start with data, ERP could be a good starting point, because your business application investments that you have done earlier into things like ERP or even HR systems or your supply chain systems, that will provide some data, or I will say majority of data, but that is where the gap analysis has to be done. Because when you look into data needs and the data compliances, you will find that some of the data is not available. And that is where you have to start a journey without that data, but somehow have to fill up in the future. So I think ERP could be a good starting point. But it's as far as I know, the compliances that I went through, not everything is available in ERP. So it's not very easy to say that if once you have an ERP or an HR system, it will be very easy to comply with the statutory requirements of whatever framework you're using. But it could be a good starting point.
All right, Dr. Bima, you want to add anything?
No, I mean, Irfan is 100% spot on. I think you know, if you have an ERP system, then more than likely you will have some of the data points that you need for the ESG. I'm not aware of any ERP systems that are completely. But what tends to happen is they get connected to specific ESG tools, other tools that then feed. So you're exchanging data between ERP systems and another ESG reporting tool to really kind of help you in the overall reporting. But if any tool, any existing, and I think if I'm talking about ERP or the procurement and supply chain management, will have the information. So it gives a starting point. But in order to do that, you need to understand what data you're looking for, and that goes back to really understanding where you are currently and what is it that you're trying to do.
Yep. So it's either you have the data or you have not have the data, but it will depend on if you know where you are and where you are going. Yeah. So I don't see any more questions in chat box. I did want to highlight something that I feel that it should be also part of the, how do you say, benefits of using ESG reporting tools, is that you can actually control greenwashing when it comes to putting in data, verified data correctly and assured data correctly. So it should help in that aspect, especially when you're not doing things manually. So I wanted to add on to that in case we didn't cover greenwashing. So okay, if anybody wants to ask the question using mic, please go ahead. I'll give another 1 minute to open the floor.
So while we wait for the question, I just want to add one thing here, is that the development that is happening around us, around taking ESG or reporting, is like we were talking earlier about IFRS or ISSB. So those are new things that are coming in, and I think they will start from next year.
Yes.
So, and from February onwards. And if you attend their seminars or webinars, they are also highlighting the one thing that you have to start from somewhere. So they are not very picky on things to start with. The idea is to at least start the journey. So if you want to comply 100%, it will never start. So I think the key is to start the journey.
Right. It's like eating an elephant, right? You take one piece at a time. Yes. All right. Okay. Let me see. Got any questions?
Okay, so while we are waiting for the question, I just want to give a quick reminder. So everyone, please do share your names and your email addresses in the chat box so that we can send you a certificate of participation later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ifa.
Excellent. I think.
All right. So if there are no more questions from the floor, so if I will put here our email address. Let me see if I can get this. In case anyone has any questions, you can also email us at info@software360.com. So before we wrap up this session, maybe you want to take 1 minute, Dr. Bima, just to summarize what you feel that, let's say from this webinar, whoever came here today, what is the first thing they can do tomorrow in order to start the ESG journey?
I think, I mean, what I invite everybody to do is just to kind of take a deep breath and sort of ask yourself, if you're working directly within the ESG, if ESG is directly part of your role or not, is really understanding, ask yourself, what are we doing at the moment in ESG? Do I actually know what we're doing? From a company perspective, do we actually know? Are you aware of what's going on? Secondly, what is it that you what is it you want to do, and ask yourself why you feel that is the next step. That's really, really important. And I think on a personal level, I would also encourage you to get to know ESG as a subject area much more depth. Read about it. Ask people. It's really important, I think, for you to kind of reach out to people that whether it's this group that you're now part of. If you have any questions you don't understand, don't be like shy. That not everybody knows everybody. I mean, and believe you me, I have been in with a lot of people who are very senior in companies within ESG. And they'll ask me things like, when quietly, can you just quickly just give me a summary of what ESG of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 is? Because they don't want to be, seen as not knowing these things. That's fine. I think pretending to know what you're doing is the biggest can be your biggest handicap going forward. So it's really just asking yourself, do I understand what the company's doing? What do I understand about ESG? And if you have started a project, if you have started work, really just ask, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And then go from there, because there are so many different elements to ESG. So that's the one I say. Okay.
Okay. What about you, Stefan? 1 minute.
I just want to add that basically ESG is not only about corporates talking about ESG reporting. It's about our individual capacities as well. So we have to believe that it's not only about reporting and crunching some numbers, like what Dr. Mabel was saying earlier. It's basically about believing that we want to apply these compliances in our day-to-day life and day-to-day business. So whether it is about environment or social or I will say governance, the key message is like what we have in sustainability definition. The idea is that we should leave a better world when we leave this world. So that is all very important for all of us as individuals. So if you keep on looking into number crunching, we will not survive for long, because the game is totally different now. We can sense that, because me and Bimal, we are always from, I will say, 24 hours working on this area. So we know where the world is going. So it's not going to be, the future is, I'm not threatening, but giving an opportunity to people to understand that it's a very serious game. It's not just about putting some number in like what we used to do in CSR initiatives, which is more voluntarily, or we do greenwashing. So now people are smart enough, they have the mechanism to identify greenwashing as well. And with technology coming in, especially AI, ML, I can give you a heads up that things will be different very soon.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
2 minutes wrap up. Thank you to our panelists today for your time to engage in this session. Thank you to everyone else who joined us today. And I think this was actually quite an impactful conversation. I myself took a lot of points just now, and maybe later I will actually help to summarize it and in an email format and share with those that have attended, and maybe some who missed it due to conflict of scheduling. And we are planning to conduct more webinars in the future to talk on issues commonly facing organizations on this ESG topic. So I do hope people can stay tuned for that for the upcoming webinars. And so yeah, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up this session for today. And thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.